Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some excerpts from an introduction to the works of Lucretius.
Oh, wow, Lucretius.
Yeah, he was a Roman poet and philosopher,
Oh, cool.
and he lived over 2,000 years ago. But
Wow, over 2,000 years ago.
yeah, so it's fascinating how his ideas still resonate today.
I know, it's really incredible how relevant they are.
Yeah, so we're going to explore what made Lucretius so revolutionary and why his work still matters today,
Right, that's good.
and how his ideas can actually help us understand the world around us even now.
I'm excited to learn more about this.
Yeah, so to start off, Lucretius was a follower of Epicurus.
Epicurus?
Yeah. Do you know much about Epicurus?
Not a ton. I know that he was a Greek philosopher.
That's right.
Nice.
Yeah, he was a Greek philosopher, and he advocated for a life that was free from fear and superstition.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he really emphasized the power of observation and logic.
Observation and logic, interesting.
Yeah, and Lucretius really took those ideas and ran with them. He laid out this whole system for understanding the universe, all based on this idea that everything is made up of tiny particles.
Tiny particles.
Yeah, we call them atoms.
Okay.
And these atoms are indivisible.
So everything is made of atoms.
Everything.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim for someone back then.
It really is. It was incredibly radical for his time.
I bet.
Just imagine trying to explain the world without relying on gods or anything supernatural.
So just atoms moving in a void.
Yeah, basically.
That's wild.
It's like one of those physics simulations you see today,
Yeah.
where all the particles are colliding and they're creating these amazing patterns.
Yeah, I've seen those.
But Lucretius was thinking about this centuries before any of that technology even existed.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Lucretius didn't just come up with this theory just for the sake of it.
Oh, so he applied it.
Yeah, he used it to explain all sorts of natural phenomena.
Like what?
Oh, from thunderstorms to volcanoes,
Really?
even to the origin of life itself.
Wow, so he used atoms to explain, like, everything.
Yeah, he was trying to create a whole picture of the universe based on this idea.
So how did he connect atoms to something like a thunderstorm?
Well, he believed that thunderstorms happened because of collisions
Collisions of what?
of atoms within the storm clouds.
Okay.
So think of it like friction, you
Yeah.
know, how friction creates heat and then can create fire.
Right.
But he was imagining this happening on an atomic scale.
Oh, wow.
And he used similar logic to explain other things like wind and rain.
So he was like a proto-meteorologist.
You could say that, yeah.
Using atoms to explain the weather.
Exactly, and that really highlights a key theme in his work.
Oh, what's that?
It's this focus on observation and rational explanation.
Okay.
It's all about understanding the world through natural processes.
Instead of resorting to myths or superstition.
Exactly. And this leads us to what might have been one of the most challenging things about Lucretius for people back then.
Oh, what's that?
His refutation of religion.
He refuted religion.
He directly challenged religious beliefs.
Wow, that must have been controversial.
Oh, it definitely was.
Especially back then.
Yeah, he especially challenged beliefs that instilled fear and anxiety. Particularly the fear of death.
That's a big one.
It is, and it took a lot of courage to question those dominant religious beliefs back then.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But Lucretius saw religion as a source of unnecessary suffering. He thought it kept people from living truly fulfilling lives.
It's like he's saying, don't let the fear of the unknown control you.
Exactly. There's a rational explanation for everything he thought.
Even for death.
Even death.
And how did he explain that?
He argued that this fear of punishment after death,
Yeah.
it's unfounded because the soul,
The soul.
yeah, which he believed was also made of atoms,
Okay.
simply dissolves along with the body.
So no eternal soul.
Not according to Lucretius.
That's a pretty bold statement even today.
It is, but it all comes back to this idea of understanding the world through the lens of natural processes.
Everything can be explained by atoms.
Exactly. And this leads us to another really fascinating aspect of his work.
What's that?
His ideas about the origin and evolution of life.
Oh, wow. So he had thoughts on evolution too.
He believed that life arose spontaneously from the earth.
Spontaneously.
Yeah, like a sort of primordial soup of atoms.
Okay.
They combine in just the right way to create simple organisms.
So no divine spark or anything like that?
Nope, just the right mix of atoms under the right conditions.
Interesting.
And from there, he envisioned this process of gradual evolution, where organisms adapt to their environment
Okay.
and pass on beneficial traits to their offspring.
Survival of the fittest.
Exactly, and he described this centuries before Darwin.
Wow, so he was way ahead of his time.
He really was. It's remarkable how many of his ideas anticipated modern scientific thinking.
It makes you wonder what he could have discovered with the tools we have today.
Right. Like, imagine if he had access to telescopes and satellites.
He could have studied the composition of stars and planets.
Right. Exactly. But even without those tools, he was able to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, he offered a radically different way of seeing the world.
And maybe the most intriguing part is how he tries to reconcile this system of atoms and void with the idea of free will.
Oh, that is interesting because it seems very deterministic.
It does. He introduces this concept he calls the swerve.
The swerve.
Yeah, have you heard of this?
I haven't. What is that?
Well, so he argued that while atoms generally follow these predictable paths,
Going?
there's this inherent randomness to their movement.
Randomness.
Yeah, he believed that atoms could spontaneously deviate from their course. And that creates this unpredictable swerve.
So it's not all predetermined.
Not entirely. There's an element of chance involved.
And what does this have to do with free will?
Well, Lucretius argued that this element of chance,
Yeah.
this swerve, was essential for free will to exist.
Oh, I see.
It introduces this level of uncertainty that allows for independent action and choice.
So even though we're made of atoms, those atoms have a certain freedom to them.
Right. That freedom translates to our own ability to make choices.
Exactly. It's a really thought-provoking concept.
It is.
It shows how Lucretius wasn't just interested in the physical world.
Yeah.
He was also interested in the nature of consciousness and human agency.
He wanted to understand how we fit into this grand scheme of atoms and void.
Yeah, before we get deeper into his explanations of specific natural phenomena, I think it'd be good to pause
Okay.
and think about what we've learned so far.
Sounds good.
What do you think about all this?
It's really fascinating to me how he used this idea of the natural world to free himself and his readers from fear.
Yeah.
And superstition. He didn't shy away from asking tough questions.
Nope.
And he always looked for rational explanations, even when those explanations challenged the beliefs of his time.
He was way ahead of his time.
Definitely a revolutionary thinker.
For sure.
It really is a powerful message.
It is. It makes you think.
It does.
Especially in today's world where there's just so much information and uncertainty.
But let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and look at some specific examples of how Lucretius actually applied this atomic theory.
Okay. Sounds good.
So he had some fascinating ideas about the formation of the world.
Yeah. How did he explain how a world comes to be?
Right, because everything comes down to atoms and a void.
Yeah.
So how do you get mountains and oceans and all this incredible life from that?
That's a big question.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how you go from these tiny particles bouncing around to something like our planet.
Right. It's not intuitive.
Not at all. So what did Lucretius think?
Well, he imagined it as kind of a cosmic dance.
A cosmic dance.
Yeah, the swirling chaos of atoms constantly colliding and interacting,
Okay.
and over huge stretches of time.
Like millions of years.
Billions even.
Wow.
He thought these random collisions would lead to stable combinations, so heavier elements would sink.
Like attracts, like.
Exactly. And gradually you start to see distinct structures emerging.
So it's not like there's a divine architect carefully crafting everything.
Not at all.
It's more, like you said, a cosmic blender.
Yeah.
With atoms swirling around and clumping together for eons.
Exactly. It's a process of trial and error without a plan.
Wow. And eventually this leads to the formation of Earth and the sea and the air, even the stars and planets.
That was his idea.
It's incredible how he thought of all this without any of the tools we have today.
It is.
We have telescopes, we have satellites.
We can study the composition of stars and planets.
He had his observations and his reasoning.
And that's what's so remarkable.
It is.
His theory that the world wasn't created by design but by these natural processes really challenged the common beliefs of his time.
It really did.
It opens up a whole new way of thinking about our place in the cosmos.
It does no grand design, no divine intervention, just atoms doing their thing.
Over unimaginable periods.
Yeah, what a shift in perspective.
It is.
But what about life itself? How did Lucretius explain the emergence of living beings from this primordial soup of atoms?
Well, he believed that life arose spontaneously from the earth.
Spontaneously so, like plants sprouting from seeds.
Kind of like that he imagined the right combination of atoms under the right conditions could create a simple organism.
So no divine spark or anything?
No, just atoms interacting in specific ways.
Fascinating. And once these simple organisms emerged, what happened?
Well, then Lucretius believed they continued to evolve and diversify over time.
Okay.
He described a process where organisms with beneficial traits would pass those on to their offspring,
Okay.
and those less suited would eventually die out.
It's survival of the fittest.
Exactly, centuries before Darwin.
Another example of how his insights anticipated modern science.
Right.
And this idea of evolution wasn't just for animals and plants, he applied it to human society too.
That's right. He talked about how early humans lived like wild animals.
Yeah.
Gradually developing language tools, agricultural structures.
So not a fall from grace,
Not at all.
but a gradual process of learning and adaptation.
Exactly.
Interesting, he even suggested that many of our conflicts today,
Yeah.
things like warfare,
The pursuit of wealth and power.
they stem from our fear of death.
A fear that he believed could be overcome by understanding the true nature of things.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is, but it connects back to the core Epicurean principle of living free from fear.
Right.
Lucretius believed that by understanding the universe,
Including the fact that death is just atoms rearranging.
right,
We could free ourselves from anxiety and live better lives.
more fulfilling lives.
Yeah, a message that resonates even today.
Definitely.
This idea that knowledge and understanding can help us live better lives.
That's a powerful idea.
But let's get back to the science for a minute.
Okay.
We've talked about his ideas about the formation of the world and the origin of life,
Right.
but he also used his atomic theory to explain so many different natural phenomena.
He did, from weather patterns to earthquakes to the properties of materials.
He seems like he was driven by this insatiable curiosity,
He was.
wanting to understand how everything worked from the smallest atom to the largest star.
And he wasn't content with just observing.
Right.
He wanted to explain these things using his atomic theory.
So, for example, how did he explain lightning?
He described lightning as a collision of atoms within clouds, generating heat and fire.
So, no angry gods,
Right.
just atoms following their natural laws.
Exactly. He was looking for that physical explanation, a connection to his atomic framework.
That makes sense. And
Yeah.
what about volcanoes? How did those fit into his theory?
He said that they resulted from underground winds and fires,
Okay.
building up pressure and eventually erupting through the Earth's surface.
So, again, no need for myths or legends.
It's a natural process.
Interesting. He even had a theory about magnetism.
He did. He suggested that magnets emit a kind of stream of particles that attract iron.
Wow. It's incredible how he could connect these different phenomena with a single unifying principle, his atomic theory.
It is, and this drive to find a rational explanation is one of the things that makes his work so relevant today.
How so?
Well, in a world where we're often faced with complex and seemingly inexplicable events,
Yeah.
Lucretius reminds us of the power of observation reason and the search for underlying principles.
It's like he's saying, don't just accept things at face value.
Question, investigate. Try to understand how things work.
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of his work, his exploration of the senses.
Yes, and how they shape our understanding of the world.
Right. He was very interested in vision.
Yes, how we see.
I remember reading something about him talking about idols or images that emanate from objects.
Yes, he believed that objects emitted these tiny particles he called idols,
Okay.
and they would travel through the air and enter our eyes.
Okay.
And these idols carried information about the object, its shape, color, texture.
So we could perceive it.
Exactly.
Kind of like how we understand light and optics today.
Sort of a simplified version, but the basic idea is there,
He was trying to explain vision using his atomic theory.
showing that even something as complex as sight could be understood through these interactions of tiny particles.
But he also recognized that our senses have limitations, right?
He talked about things like optical illusions
Yeah.
and how our perception can be tricked.
Right.
He used examples of mirrors and shadows to illustrate that our senses aren't always accurate.
So be critical thinkers.
Yes, don't just accept things blindly,
Our senses are essential.
but they can also be fallible.
This emphasis on critical thinking is another reason why Lucretius is still relevant today.
In a world with so much information,
Yeah.
it's more important than ever to be able to think for ourselves,
To discern truth from falsehood.
to question assumptions.
It's a reminder that true knowledge requires more than just passively absorbing information.
It does. It requires active engagement, critical analysis, and a willingness to challenge our own perceptions.
Right. But even with this emphasis on logic and reason,
Yeah.
Lucretius wasn't afraid to tackle some pretty big philosophical questions.
He wasn't.
His atomic theory wasn't just science.
It was a foundation for his ethical and philosophical views.
He thought that understanding the universe could help us live better lives.
More fulfilling lives.
But how does understanding that we're all made of atoms lead to a better life?
Well, it starts with accepting that everything is made up of atoms in constant motion.
Always changing.
and eventually dispersing.
Sounds kind of bleak.
It can seem that way, but think of it this way.
Okay.
Understanding the impermanence of all things can help us let go of anxieties and attachments.
So clinging to things causes suffering.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Lucretius believed that this could lead to appreciating the present moment
Okay.
and the beauty of the world around us.
Because we know it's temporary.
And precious.
So instead of fearing death,
Or clinging to the past.
we can focus on living fully now
Appreciate the beauty of the world.
and the fleeting nature of our own existence.
Right. It ties back to his idea that fear, particularly fear of death, is a major source of unhappiness.
Makes sense.
By understanding that death is natural,
Just a rearranging of atoms.
we can be free from that fear.
And live more joyful, meaningful lives.
Exactly.
What a powerful message.
Yes.
True freedom comes from understanding the nature of things.
Accepting the impermanence of all things.
Living in harmony with the natural world.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it's a message that has resonated for centuries.
It has inspired so many.
It has.
But before we wrap up our deep dive into Lucretius,
Okay.
I want to touch on one more aspect of his work.
Yeah.
His explanation of specific natural phenomena using his atomic theory.
Okay.
I'm really curious about his ideas about the weather.
Oh, weather, that's a good one.
It seems like it would be hard to explain using an atomic theory.
Yeah, it's so dynamic and unpredictable.
It does seem like it'd be a challenge.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But Lucretius, he tackled it head on.
He did.
Yeah, he really believed that even the most complex weather,
Yeah.
could be understood as atoms moving and colliding in specific ways.
So no need for like storm gods or anything?
Nope, just atoms following their natural laws.
So how did he explain wind?
But he described wind as just air in motion, driven by differences in temperature and pressure.
Okay.
So imagine all these countless atoms.
Yeah.
They get heated by the sun, they expand,
Okay.
and then they push against the cooler air.
Creating those currents.
Yeah, and gusts.
So it's like a giant invisible game of atomic billiards?
I like that analogy.
All those collisions and rebounds.
Yeah, creating those winds that sweep across the earth.
That's cool. What about rain?
Well, he explained rain as water vapor condensing and falling back down to earth.
Okay.
So picture like countless water atoms energized by heat
Yeah.
rising up into the atmosphere.
Okay.
But then they cool and cluster together.
And form those droplets.
Exactly. And then they become heavy enough to fall as rain.
So even something as simple as rain is actually really complex.
It is this whole dance of atoms driven by heat and pressure.
That's wild. Okay, what about thunder and lightning?
Oh, those are good ones.
Yeah, those are like the classic displays of,
Of celestial power.
Yeah. Did Lucretius have an explanation for those?
He believed that thunder was the sound of clouds colliding.
Clouds colliding.
Wow. These huge masses of atoms clashing together, creating shockwaves.
So the rumble of thunder.
Yeah, it's the echo of all these atomic collisions happening way up high.
That's amazing. Okay, what about lightning those bolts of energy?
Well, Lucretius saw lightning as a result of those same collisions,
Okay.
generating sparks. Hey, imagine that the friction between clouds,
Yeah.
the rubbing together of all these atoms would create static charges.
In a zap.
Yeah, and eventually they discharge in a flash of light.
So again, he's connecting these amazing events to his atomic framework.
Exactly, showing that even the most awe-inspiring phenomena can be explained through these tiny particles.
It's really fascinating. And this approach wasn't just for weather.
No, he applied it to other things too, like earthquakes.
Earthquakes, okay.
Yeah, he believed that they were caused by shifts and movements within the Earth's structure,
Okay.
again as a result of atoms rearranging themselves under pressure.
So no angry deities.
No, just atoms doing their thing.
Interesting. And this idea of natural explanations extended even to disease.
Yes, he thought that illnesses were caused by tiny invisible particles.
Particles.
Yeah, he called them seeds.
Seeds.
And he thought they could enter the body and disrupt its natural functions.
That's kind of like the germ theory of disease.
It is, isn't it?
Wow, 2,000 years ahead of his time.
It's remarkable.
So it seems like Lucretius was really trying to find a natural explanation for everything.
He was from the grandest cosmic events to the most intimate human experiences.
What about things like magnetism or the properties of different materials?
He had thoughts on those too. He was really fascinated by magnetism,
Okay.
and he tried to explain it using his atomic theory.
How?
Well, he imagined that magnets emitted a sort of stream of atoms
Okay.
that could interact with other magnetic materials.
Causing attraction or repulsion?
Exactly. It was his way of trying to fit this mysterious force into his framework.
Interesting. So he was tackling some big questions.
Oh, yeah. He wasn't afraid to try and explain the most perplexing things.
Always looking for a way to connect it back to his understanding of the universe.
That was Lucretius.
So what about different materials? Like, why are some things hard and others soft? Some are liquid, some are solid.
He had some thoughts on that, too.
Really?
He argued that the properties of materials depended on the shapes and arrangements of the atoms.
Oh, okay.
For example, he thought that smooth, round atoms might create a flute like water,
Okay.
while jagged interlocking atoms might make a solid like a rock.
So the way things feel and behave is all because of the atoms.
That was his idea, that even the texture of reality could be traced back to the shapes and interactions of those tiny building blocks.
That's pretty intuitive.
It is, and it's an approach that's had a lasting impact, you know?
Really?
It's influenced fields like materials, science, and nanotechnology.
Wow. So they're using his ideas today.
In a way, they are manipulating atoms and molecules to create new materials.
It's amazing to think about how much Lucretius figured out.
Just by observing and using his reason.
Yeah, his atomic theory wasn't just a scientific model. It was a way of seeing the world.
It was a framework for understanding everything.
And maybe most importantly, a philosophy for living.
Exactly. Lucretius believed that by understanding the universe, the atoms, the impermanence of everything,
We could free ourselves from fear
embrace the present moment,
and live better lives.
more fulfilling lives.
It's a message that's still so powerful today.
It is a call to look beyond the surface, to question, to seek understanding,
To find joy in the world.
even in the face of its impermanence.
Lucretius was a true visionary.
He
A
was,
thinker who challenged the status quo and looked for natural explanations.
and offered a path to a life free from fear.
Full of wonder.
His work reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge can transform us.
It can change the way we see the world and live our lives.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive into Lucretius has been amazing.
It has.
It's incredible how relevant his ideas still are.
I know, it's really made me think.
Yeah. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I think Lucretius would encourage us to never stop questioning
To keep seeking knowledge.
and never lose that sense of wonder at the universe.
Wise words indeed. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Lucretius.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this journey back to ancient Rome,
It's been a pleasure.
exploring the mind of one of history's most insightful thinkers.
Definitely.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking knowledge.
And never stop wondering.